Welcome to the Sirius report. This is Paul, and today we're asking the question: is a recent Trump directive likely to threaten global stability? But first, let's assess some recent developments with regards to US foreign policy. Trump has made it very clear the US wants the Ukraine war over and wants peace and stability in the region. The reasons can be multifold, and people will have different opinions, but that is the stated intention. With regards to Israel, Gaza, and Hamas, the US's position is always going to be to support Israel, but the US equally would like to have stability in this region. They, of course, are likely on that basis to have far more threatening overtures to Hamas. But also, of course, the United States wants broader sort of peace initiative to exist between the Israelis and the Iranians. In terms of Syria, the US has made its position very clear. It's had a very low-key kind of perspective on the removal of Assad and the chaos that's now ensuing. And frankly, the US has made sensible decisions in that regard. There is the question of China, which as yet it's not clear. The US's policy initiatives are very mixed in terms of what it is wanting to do, what it intends doing. It talks about Chinese investment inside the United States. It talks about having a far stronger trade agreement between the two countries, but then Trump can't help but get embroiled in some tariff spat, which has been between the two countries, which has been going on since 2018. The US under Trump has shown no desire whatsoever to get involved in Afghanistan again, although this new directive might change that perspective. And the United States has talked about and is intending to wind up AFRICOM, or US African Command, and amalgamating it with the US's EU command. So that puts a bit of perspective on some of the developments, but not all of them. But then the US has come out, and this is a Trump initiative, to relax the rules for US armed forces in terms of the kind of potential targets they would determine for airstrikes, and also what might be termed special operation raids. This would be outside conventional war. So that immediately raises a whole bunch of questions, given the United States' very checkered history of deciding to launch preemptive airstrikes with no UN mandate, and also, of course, often no Congress mandate either. Now, according to the Trump administration, they say, which is hardly a surprise, that this signals a return to more aggressive counterterrorism policies. Now, the problem with the United States is when it talks about counterterrorism, it has this very strange perspective of deciding sometimes something is counterterrorism and turning a blind eye to other terrorism. The US Defense Secretary Hegseth came out after signing a directive, and this was a meeting with senior military leaders from US Africa Command, which therefore then starts to raise a question. Well, if you're kind of winding that up and amalgamating it into the US Euro or EU Command, is this initiative earmarked for Africa as a continent? Bearing in mind, Western nations have been unceremoniously kicked out of the Sahel region by the likes of Niger, Mali, etc. Now, this document is aimed at apparently easing policy constraints, worryingly executive oversight on airstrikes, and the deployment of American forces just for special operations, clearly. What is unclear is if the directive contains any provisions about the need for approvals from decision makers, including the president, meaning Trump, of course, and the decision making and approval for choosing targets. So in that situation, who then makes decisions? Does somebody in the military just say, well, we've decided on this basis that this is a legitimate target? We're not going to need approval from the president. Who do we need approval from? We can just deploy those forces. We don't need executive oversight. And basically, we could, in principle, and I stress in principle, give somebody inside the military or someone else the authority to have free rein to do whatever they like. That, for me, is extremely dangerous and most certainly has the risk of indeed threatening global stability, because the US has had this history of making decisions which have had very, very detrimental effects. And, we can talk about all manner of these, including, obviously, and I'm not saying this was made without executive oversight, including Trump, but when they went in and assassinated Soleimani, that was a disastrous policy decision. It caused enormous damage to the United States' credibility and its reputation. And therefore, on this basis, this could therefore give elements in the United States just the latitude to go anywhere in the world, claim something is counterterrorism, and launch an operation. This is not obviously going to war with countries. It would be very specific, or presumably very specific, but it's a big problem in the making. And because of the US's track record, that makes it all the more concerning. Now, the directive obviously admits it would give flexibility by allowing commanders greater latitude to decide who they want to target, and also relaxing this kind of centralized control that the Biden administration implemented over airstrikes and raids by US special forces. So you can argue many policy decisions in the Biden administration were completely wrong. That was one I think was reasonable, and that's how it should be in place. Because, if otherwise this could be abused extremely badly. There might be people making decisions who have no right to make decisions. It could lead to operations being undertaken that could have far-reaching ramifications, not only for the region it's conducted in, but for the United States also. The argument coming out of the Trump administration is, look, this carries potential benefits or downsides because we're going to far more streamline this process. So on the one hand, we can degrade foreign terrorist organizations' capabilities quicker. Well, I've heard that so many times and it never has come to pass. When they talk about going into Afghanistan and degrading the Taliban, 20 years later, and after spending trillions of dollars, the Taliban walks back in and takes control. So this is not reality. The one thing also on the flip side, it does raise the risk of the likelihood of very badly determined operations being implemented, completely ridiculous decisions made. And then, of course, there's all the risk of civilians being killed in the process, what they love to refer to as collateral damage. And of course, the United States is already looking at targets, and it's going to go meddling in places in Africa for sure, and because it will determine these are legitimate terrorist organizations. So that would include places like Somalia, Sudan. Also, the argument is it is a backdoor way for the United States to start meddling in Yemen, potentially, which is, of course, very ill-advised, because if they start locking horns again with the Houthis, then the Houthis may decide to take retribution, including, as they have done, in basically controlling the Red Sea and not allowing US vessels to travel through it. There are also claims even very early, into Trump's administration, that already the United States has carried out terrorist missions in Somalia. They say belongs to ISIS. Okay, fair enough. Then the United States doesn't seem to particularly be keen to deal with ISIS in other parts of the world, including Syria. The argument, of course, is, was this operation and other operations offensive or defensive? And there are a number of areas in all these operations where it's a kind of fog of war, scaled down because it's not a war, it's a military operation, very contained and specific. But it creates very likely possibilities in the future where there's going to be a backlash to this, and anything that in essence aggravates problems with respect to terrorism is going to cause global instability. Because from my perspective, and I've said this for years, the biggest threat in the future is not wars between nations, it's the threat of global terrorism. And there needs to be a global response to deal with this, and there needs to be a recognition that a lot of terrorist organizations have very dubious funding sources and arming sources. This all has to stop. And in essence, a global approach that could include the Chinese, Russians, and whoever else, NATO members, that then they work together, eliminate these problems, but not allowing one country like the United States to have this flexibility to do whatever they want, how they want, and when they want, because that could be subject not just to poorly executed operations based on flawed decisions, but it allows the United States then to indiscriminately target whoever they want, whether they are a legitimate target or not. And that, for me, is the very essence of creating global instability. And with that, we end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, for all your ongoing support, which, of course, we greatly appreciate. Please like, share, and subscribe. Pass this on to other people. We're trying to grow the channel, and we appreciate your efforts in assisting us with that. And with that, I'll say goodbye.